I remember exactly how the house looked the first time I laid eyes on it, looming at the end of a narrow street like a monolith daring me to approach. The day was unusually cold for a summer afternoon. Gray clouds hung low, and a brisk breeze carried the faint smell of rain and damp earth. My parents and I pulled up in our old sedan, the trunk loaded with boxes of clothes, toys, and a hodgepodge of household items we hadn't yet unpacked. I was 8 years old, and despite trying to be excited about the big new home, I couldn't shake the prickling discomfort at the back of my neck. We'd been renting a small place across town, which always felt warm and cozy, if a bit cramped, so the notion of moving into a house that was almost twice the size thrilled my parents. It had a grand, slightly lopsided porch in the front, a sagging roofline, and too many windows to count from the street. The realtor had explained that it was once a duplex, later converted into a single-family home. In my child's imagination, that little piece of trivia explained its odd proportions, weird corners, and more than a few baffling passages that I would discover in the months to come. But on that day, I was just a kid, looking up at a massive, unfamiliar structure and feeling small beneath it. When my parents unlocked the front door, which groaned on its hinges as though it hadn't been opened in years, we were greeted by a musty odor that reminded me of old books and wet leaves. A wide hallway stretched before us, with a staircase on the right that twisted up to the second floor. The floors were hardwood, but their shine had long since faded, and in some places, the planks buckled or squeaked when you stepped on them. The house was so large that our voices echoed in the empty rooms. My mother giggled with a mix of excitement and nerves, turning to me and insisting that we decorate my new room in any color I liked. My father mumbled something about a lot of space for us to grow into, though even then, I noted his forced smile. It was as if a subtle tension had already gripped him, and he was trying to convince not just me, but also himself, that this home was perfect. I followed them into the living room, a cavernous space with a brick fireplace set against the far wall. The windows were tall and narrow, letting in thin shafts of light that did little to dispel the gloom. Oddly, I felt sure someone was watching us from the shadows. Every footstep on the dusty floor sounded too loud. My father coughed, remarking that the place needed a thorough cleaning. The realtor had told us the previous owners left in a hurry, leaving behind a few of their belongings, some furniture, a stack of boxes in the basement, and, apparently, random knickknacks that might pop up in closets or corners. We wandered through the kitchen, which had outdated appliances, peeling wallpaper, and a door leading to the backyard. Beyond that door, a narrow flight of steps descended into the basement. I remember the detail most vividly. The basement door had a single, dusty window pane, and even from the top of the steps, I could see an old overhead light flickering like it might die at any moment. I didn't want to go down there, not even in broad daylight, but my father insisted, curious about the space. My mother and I stood on the threshold, peering downward, while he flicked the light switch. From my vantage point, I saw damp concrete floors and the shape of something large and metallic, an ancient water heater, lurking in the corner. The place smelled of mildew and rust. I might have left it at that had I not seen, in the far darkness, the outline of a wheelchair. It was an old-fashioned model, the kind with large spoked wheels, high-backed, made of wood and metal. Even at 8 years old, I knew it was an anachronism, something from decades earlier, the sort of prop you might see in a horror film. My father shrugged, stepping back up. "We'll deal with it later," he said. "Just an old piece of junk." But that single sight of a wheelchair in the far corner of a dank basement lodged in my mind. I didn't like how it looked. I didn't like how it made me feel. I was aware of a creeping sense of dread, as though the wheelchair was waiting for someone. Waiting for me, maybe. Upstairs, the second floor had a series of bedrooms. That's when it struck me that the house was huge, far more expansive than I needed or wanted. My parents had their pick of the biggest room, with large bay windows facing the street. I was given a room near the stairs, which was small by comparison, but at least felt a bit cozier. Across the hallway, a door led up another set of stairs to the attic. My father said that we might use the attic as a playroom or storage space. After climbing those steps, I saw the attic was partially finished, wood paneling on the walls, a single small window on each end. But it was hot, stuffy, and reeked of dust. Flies buzzed around the windows. Even as I waved them away, I found a few dead ones on the sill. I grimaced. If this was to be a playroom, I thought, maybe I'd never want to play in it. But none of those details were as striking as the secret passage I discovered later that week. At first, it was just a rumor. My dad had found a narrow staircase running from the second floor all the way down to the basement, separate from the main stairs. The door to that staircase was concealed behind what looked like a hallway closet. The realtor's explanation was that, when it was a duplex, the second-floor tenants needed direct basement access. Logical enough, I supposed, but in my imagination, that narrow corridor was simply another way for sinister things to sneak up from the depths. The door had no lock, at least none that worked, and I couldn't help imagining it creaking open in the middle of the night to let something crawl up and into our home. Over the next few weeks, we settled in as best we could. My parents bought new furniture, painted the living room walls a bright yellow to offset the gloom, and tried to imbue the place with a sense of cheer. I tried to adapt too. I decorated my room with posters of my favorite cartoon characters, arranged my toys on shelves, and put my stuffed animals on the bed to create a small army of comfort. Yet no matter how brightly my mother hung curtains, or how many colorful rugs my father laid down, a feeling of dread underpinned everything. I'd wake in the mornings and, for a moment, forget where I was, only to remember in a flash and feel my stomach churn with unease. The first time I felt truly spooked, I was alone in my bedroom one afternoon, flipping through a storybook. My parents were both downstairs unpacking more boxes. The day was quiet. I recall hearing only the distant hum of traffic outside. Then came that feeling, a presence behind me. It was so strong that I actually turned around, expecting someone to be there. Nobody was, of course, but the sensation lingered, like breath on my neck, as though someone was bending close to see what I was reading. My heart pounded. I whispered, "Mom? Or maybe, Dad?" No answer. I retreated from my bedroom, book in hand, and headed downstairs to be in their company, not mentioning the experience out of fear they'd just laugh it off. But that was the first in a series of uncanny moments that would plague me for the next 5 years we lived there. Our basement, with that wheelchair, was easily the worst place in the house. My father occasionally went down to check the water heater or rummage through boxes, but my mother hated it, claiming the air made her cough. I avoided it altogether. The overhead light would flicker, revealing strange shapes in the corners. The walls were lined with crumbling brick. Cobwebs collected in the rafters, drifting like ghosts in the stale air. That wheelchair, though, remained. We never threw it out. I could never figure out why. It was as if my parents decided it was too cumbersome to bother removing, or maybe they felt some sentimental reluctance, though that was ridiculous since it wasn't ours. Whatever the reason, it sat there, gathering dust and giving me nightmares. Even more unsettling was the fact that the secret staircase landed directly in that basement room, so if I stood at the bottom, I could gaze up the narrow steps into total darkness. I'd catch a glimpse of the second-floor light if the door above was open. The knowledge that an entire hidden route existed, connecting my second-floor hallway to this dank, creepy space, sent shivers through me. Occasionally, I'd dream of hearing footsteps ascending that hidden flight of stairs, slow and deliberate, only to wake in a cold sweat, half convinced the dream was real. Meanwhile, The attic offered a different kind of unease. Stifling heat, dusty corners, the constant presence of dead flies. My parents wanted me to treat it like a playroom, but I never felt safe there. Even friends I brought over sensed something off. We go upstairs to rummage through old board games, only to leave a few minutes later, making excuses to do something else because the vibe was too weird. A lingering stench of must, a sense that we were being observed, and a kind of stale heaviness in the air chased us away every time. My mother would later confess she had the same feeling in that attic, as though we weren't alone, even when we obviously were. Music became my solace. I discovered that if I played bright, upbeat songs, it calmed my nerves. My favorite was Paul Simon's Graceland. I recall lying in bed at night, the lights off except for a small nightlight near the door, pressing the play button on my cassette player, letting the gentle, folksy tunes fill the darkness. I convinced myself that no ghostly entity or bad spirit could withstand the positivity of that record. If I had to stay in that house, at least I'd cloak myself in happy music, like a protective shield against whatever lurked in the corners. One night, though, the music wasn't enough. I had a nightmare. Something about the secret staircase, footsteps echoing as they climbed, a whisper calling my name from the depths below. I woke with a start, heart pounding, tears brimming in my eyes. The entire house felt menacing in the dark. Normally, when I was younger, I'd run straight to my parents' bedroom whenever I had a bad dream, and they'd let me crawl into bed with them. But I was trying to be braver at 8, going on 9, so I hesitated. Still, the dream had rattled me so completely that I needed the comfort of my mother's hug. Summoning courage, I slid out of bed, my bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor, and tiptoed down the hall to their room. The door was ajar, letting a thin rectangle of orange streetlight filter inside. As I gently pushed it open, I saw what I assumed was my mother's silhouette standing by the window. The figure's hair was messy, and the head was tilted at a slight angle, as though gazing out into the night. I froze. The posture was just off. I couldn't see my father. He must have been asleep on the bed out of view. For a moment, I thought maybe my mom was just restless, looking outside for some reason. But something about the figure didn't feel right. My stomach knotted, an electric sensation crawling up my spine. I wanted to say, "Mom?" but no words came out. My mouth felt dry. After a few seconds of paralyzing indecision, I decided that if she was awake, she wouldn't let me crawl into bed anyway. My parents had been strict about that recently. So I quietly retreated, tiptoeing back to my own room, climbing under the covers, and shivering until I fell back into a fitful sleep. The next morning, while we were having breakfast, I casually asked my mother, "Hey, why were you standing at the window last night?" She looked at me puzzled. She hadn't gotten out of bed, she said. My father backed her up, nodding that she'd been asleep the whole night. I felt a chill run through me. I insisted I'd seen someone at the window, but my parents brushed it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a leftover vision from my nightmare. Yet I knew it wasn't my imagination. I remember the figure vividly, the shoulders hunched forward slightly, the head cocked in that unnatural way, and the subtle outline of messy hair. That image became lodged in my mind, layered atop all my other fears, weaving into the tapestry of dread that this house inspired. 5 years passed, and the sense of unease never truly went away. Some nights were calmer than others. Sometimes I'd manage to convince myself the house was just old, that any sensations of being watched or followed were childlike fantasies. My parents tried to fill the halls with laughter, holiday decorations, dinner parties with extended family. But the house always felt like it wore a mask. Under the bright lights, it was just a big old home in need of repair, but at night, or on quiet afternoons, or whenever I was alone, it felt downright oppressive, like it resented our presence. The basement remained a chamber of horrors in my imagination, the wheelchair practically a symbol of everything I found disturbing. Yet we never removed it. "We'll deal with it eventually," my mother would say, though eventually never came. The secret staircase door was latched whenever possible, but it had no proper lock. Sometimes I'd find it slightly ajar when I knew nobody had touched it. My father said it was just the house settling, or a draft, but it terrified me all the same. Around the time I turned 13, my parents announced we were moving for my father's job. We packed up our belongings in an almost celebratory frenzy. I remember feeling a profound sense of relief, like I was about to be released from a curse. On the day we left, I wandered through the empty rooms one last time, listening to them echo. I noticed the wheelchair was still in the basement. My father decided to leave it behind for the next owner to deal with. As I walked out the front door, I caught a glimpse of the attic window. For a split second, I swear I saw a flicker of movement in that dark pane, as though someone was looking out to say goodbye. I told myself it was just my nerves playing tricks. I slammed the door, stuffed my hands in my pockets, and walked away with my parents, vowing never to return. We moved to a smaller, newer house in a nicer neighborhood, and life seemed to move on. But that's when the nightmares started in earnest. For 30 years, throughout my teens, into adulthood, marriage, and eventually fatherhood myself, I've experienced dreams about returning to that house. At first, they came maybe once or twice a year. Each dream carried a similar pattern. I'd find myself standing on the sidewalk outside the old place, staring up at it, an overwhelming sense of dread gripping my chest. Sometimes I'd be alone, sometimes with my parents or siblings, and occasionally with a group of faceless friends. The house always changed slightly from dream to dream, as though it evolved in my subconscious, but it was still unmistakably that house. One recurring version of the dream involved us moving back in, only to discover everything was exactly as we'd left it. The same furniture, the same random items in the fridge, now rotted and moldy. The stench was overwhelming. The walls were peeling, the floors sticky with some unidentifiable residue. In the dream, I'd walk room to room, a growing panic surging as I realized I had no power to leave, that I was once again trapped, a child in a house too large, with secrets lurking in every corner. Often, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering. In other variations, my parents would be the ones moving back, and they'd be strangely docile about it, as though hypnotized. I'd argue with them, saying, "You can't move here. You know what happened." They'd blink at me, uncomprehending, or wave off my concerns with an eerie calmness. In those dreams, I was an adult who fully remembered the terrors of that house, yet they acted as if nothing was wrong. This sense of helplessness, knowing the place was malevolent, but being unable to stop my parents, would drive me to frustration. I'd storm out, refusing to live under the same roof, but something always pulled me back. Often, the dream ended with me wandering the secret passage or rummaging through the basement, only to confront the wheelchair, rusted and caked with grime, waiting for me in the shadows. I'd snap awake in horror. Over the years, I saw the house renovated in my dreams too. Sometimes the attic would be refurbished into a bright, modern room. Other times, the basement was converted into a comfortable living space. Yet no matter how many cosmetic changes appeared in the dream, I always felt the same suffocating dread. The spirit, or whatever presence I believed haunted it, remained intact, uninterested in color schemes or fresh coats of paint. One night, I dreamt I was digging in the dirt beneath the front porch for reasons I couldn't recall. The soil was cold, clumpy, giving off a dank, earthy smell that filled my nostrils even in my sleep. My hands found something metallic. I pulled it free, wiping away dirt, to reveal a strange ring. It was a crude design, something that looked hand-forged out of black iron, with a symbol etched on it, an angular shape that might have been a face or an eye. In the dream, I felt an icy jolt of fear, like discovering an artifact that sealed my fate. Then I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, and the dream ended abruptly. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, certain that Ring was real in some intangible sense, that I disturbed something best left buried. As time went on, the dreams continued, shaping themselves to whatever stage of life I was in. When I married, my wife became part of them. At first, it was just me returning to the house alone, but eventually my wife would be there too. Sometimes we'd be touring the place, considering buying it, an absurd notion, since we already owned another home. In those dreams, I'd tried to warn her about the house's darkness, but she'd wandered cheerfully through the rooms, marveling at the space, oblivious to my distress. Other times, she'd sense it too, urging me to leave, but we'd find our car missing or the doors locked from the outside. In one especially vivid nightmare, I imagined we had already moved in with our children. This time, the house was in decent shape, fresh paint on the exterior, new siding, a neat lawn. Yet inside, the layout was the same. I found myself in the second-floor living room, kneeling by a small wood stove, trying to light a fire for warmth. The flames caught, crackling softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Then I saw movement in the next room, something tall and gaunt. A figure. My fatherly instincts kicked in. I had to protect my family. Grabbing the nearby fireplace poker, I charged into the adjacent room. What I saw made my blood freeze. A 7-foot-tall, wrinkled man, reminiscent of the ghoulish preacher from Poltergeist 2, dressed in tattered black robes that dripped from his bony frame. His eyes were sunken hollows, yet I could feel them fixing on me. His skin was ashen, deeply creased, almost leathery. Something in my mind clicked, and I realized I was having one of those dreams. A kind of furious clarity overtook me. I lunged and tackled him, determined not to let him vanish into the corners of my psyche like every other shadow in that house. For an instant, I felt his cold, papery skin beneath my hands. Then, with a jolt, I woke up, heart pounding, sweat soaking my nightclothes. The memory of that figure lingered for days, an echo of something monstrous that the house had conjured. All these experiences, these nightmares, led me to wonder, was the house truly haunted? Or was it simply a repository for my childhood fears, magnified over the years by my imagination? Rationally, I told myself it was likely the latter. I'd grown up with a sensitive disposition, and the house's gloom and oddities had cultivated a perfect storm of unease. Yet some part of me still believed there was something more. My mother once told me, long after we'd left, that she, too, sensed a presence lurking in that house. My father remained skeptical, claiming that old houses have drafts and creaks, that basements and attics are always unsettling. But I noticed even he never liked talking about it for long. Sometimes, when I visit my hometown, I find myself walking by the old property out of morbid curiosity. The new owners have painted it a pastel blue and added a basketball hoop in the driveway. I see a couple of bicycles leaning against the porch. The yard is well tended, the windows replaced with modern frames. From the outside, it looks downright cheerful. On sunny days, you might even call it inviting. I've glimpsed children playing there, laughing, with no idea of the horrors that once filled my dreams. They seem happy, unburdened by the house's history, if indeed it had a history. Maybe whatever lurked inside is gone, or maybe it only ever existed in my family's minds. But the nightmares persist. I still have them once or twice a year, sometimes more if I'm stressed or anxious. Often, I awake disoriented, half believing I'm back in that musty bedroom with the sense of someone breathing on my neck. My wife knows about them. She holds me, assures me we're in our own home, safe. Yet each time, it's like I've made another visit to that haunted place, my footsteps echoing in the halls, the wallpaper peeling away, the air stale and heavy with unspoken secrets. I tried to analyze it, picking it apart with logic. The wheelchair was just a creepy leftover from past residents. The musty attic was a product of poor ventilation. The secret staircase was a relic of the duplex layout. But logic falters when confronted with the primal fear I felt, even as a child, like something in that house was alive, watching, perhaps even feeding on my dread. One night, not long ago, I dreamed I was a child again, running through the main hallway, searching for my parents. The house was flooded with a dim twilight glow, as though the sun was setting behind heavy curtains. Every door I tried was locked. I called out, but my voice echoed emptily. Finally, I burst into the kitchen, and there was the basement door, wide open, darkness at the bottom of those steps. In a surge of bravery, I descended, each stair creaking under my feet. The wheelchair was there, illuminated by a single swaying bulb. It seemed closer than usual, as though it had been moved to the middle of the room. My heart thundered in my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shape scuttle along the wall, impossibly thin, elongated arms, more shadow than flesh. I screamed, and the dream vanished. Waking up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house still called to me, beckoning me to come back and discover the root of its darkness. Sometimes, I consider contacting the current owners to ask if they've ever experienced anything strange. But that feels intrusive, and if they're happily living there, why plant the seeds of fear? I've done some light research, scanning local records. I never found any sensational stories, a tragic death, a grisly event that might explain a haunting. It all seemed mundane. Owners came and went, a couple of renovations here and there. Yet the house's design, a once duplex turned single-family labyrinth, was unusual enough that it might have unsettled any child. Could my nightmares just be a product of that environment, shaped by an overactive imagination? Still, in my darkest moments, I wonder if the house itself is an entity or a vessel for something malevolent. Perhaps it chooses who to torment. Maybe the new owners are simply left in peace, or maybe they, too, experience flickers of movement in the attic, the occasional sense of being watched, but dismiss it as a random fear. Maybe they, like me, will leave someday, carrying the house's mark in their dreams for decades to come. Each time I revisit, I keep my distance, standing on the opposite sidewalk, hidden under the shade of an old oak tree. Once or twice, I caught sight of a curtain shifting in an upstairs window, a person's face, or was it, before it vanished behind the glass? My stomach knotted, and I turned away quickly, telling myself I had errands to run or family to meet. The urge to knock on the door, to walk inside once more, is strong, but I quell it. I'm afraid that stepping beyond that threshold might reignite something dormant, that I'd open a door in my own mind that I've struggled to keep closed. When people ask about my scariest childhood memory, I rarely mention the house. How can I explain that it wasn't one event, but a collective aura that haunted me for 5 years, then stayed in my subconscious for decades? How do I describe the intangible sense of a presence, the smell of must and decay, the squeak of the secret steps at night? Most just want a neat anecdote, some single terrifying moment. But for me, it was never just one moment. It was the entire experience of living there, day after day, night after night. On the rare occasion I open up about it, friends suggest a cleansing ritual or therapy to help me let go of the memories. I appreciate their concern, but the truth is, the nightmares aren't constant, only occasional. They're a part of me now, part of how I see the world. Perhaps they even fuel a certain respect for the unknown, a humility about how places can shape our psyche. In some twisted way, I've accepted them. If the house is a character in my life story, then I've carried it with me, and it's shaped who I've become. Once, I tried writing down every detail I could recall: the layout of the rooms, the attic stench, the basement's flickering bulb. the memory of the silhouette in my parents' room, hoping that expelling these memories onto paper might free me. It helped slightly. I felt some catharsis in describing each element. Yet the nightmares remained, and I realized that no matter how thoroughly I documented it, the feeling was beyond words. It was existential, an imprint left on my psyche at a formative age. Now that I have a family of my own, I sometimes wonder what would happen if we inherited a similarly creepy house. Would I sense it immediately? Would I uproot them before my kids had to endure any terror? Or would I second-guess my instincts, telling myself it's just an old building, only to discover too late that some places hold a darkness you can't reason away? I've made peace with the idea that I'll never have a definitive explanation. If the house was truly haunted, I doubt I'll ever confirm it. If it was just my imagination, well, it was powerful enough to shape my entire childhood and follow me like a long shadow into adulthood. The house itself remains a fixture in my dreams, an ever-morphing labyrinth that demands exploration, stirring ancient fears I'd rather keep buried. Occasionally, I'll have a different kind of dream about the house, a serene one, in which I stroll through empty rooms bathed in golden light. No fear or sense of threat at all. Those are the rarest, but they do happen. In these dreams, I feel an overwhelming sadness, as though I'm grieving for the child I was, for the years spent under the weight of unseen eyes. I walk from room to room, noticing small details. A crack in the wall, a piece of furniture left behind, a stuffed animal I forgot. I stand in the attic, gazing at the dead flies on the sill, and for once, they don't disturb me. They just exist, benign remnants of life gone by. I wish I could say these peaceful dreams have replaced the nightmares, but they remain outnumbered. Still, their existence offers a strange comfort, a hint that maybe my subconscious is trying to heal. Maybe it's telling me that though the house was terrifying, it no longer has complete power over me. Each time the nightmares return, I remind myself that I got out. My parents and I left when I was 13, and we never had to endure that house's presence again in waking life. In the dreams, it looms, but I can remind myself that it's a dream. Even in those rare moments of lucidity, I might attempt to confront the tall, wrinkled figure or peer down the secret staircase without flinching. Sometimes I succeed, and the dream melts away. More often, I wake up breathless, my heart galloping, the memory of that wheelchair or the silhouette by the window etched in my mind's eye. Still, I go on with my life. I greet each morning with renewed gratitude that I'm far from that place, that my actual home is filled with love, warmth, and security. I check on my own children at night, making sure there's no lurking shadow at their window. And though I'll never fully outrun the specter of that house, I've learned to live with its memory. In a way, it taught me the boundaries of my own courage, the depth of my own fears, and the complex interplay between environment and imagination. And so, that's the story of my childhood house, a place so big it swallowed my sense of safety, so dark it cast a shadow over my dreams for 30 years. A place that, on paper, should have been idyllic, spacious, with a yard and porch and big windows, yet in practice felt like a cage lined with old secrets. Maybe the new family who lives there truly is happy. Perhaps they purged whatever residual energy it held, or maybe they never even sensed it to begin with. Either possibility feels equally surreal to me. The house belongs as much to my nightmares as it does to the real world, bridging the gap between memory and haunt. Sometimes, I think of stopping in front of it, mustering the courage to walk up the steps and knock on the door. I imagine the friendly new owners showing me around, proud of their home, pointing out how they renovated the basement or turned the attic into a home office. Maybe I'd see that the wheelchair was long gone, replaced by neat shelves or a laundry station. Maybe I'd find the secret staircase well lit, properly floored, no longer the cramped corridor of my nightmares. Part of me wants to see it tamed, to banish the illusions that have plagued me. But another part insists that I leave it alone, preserve the mystery, let the legend remain. Because if I saw it under normal, unremarkable conditions, maybe that would unravel something in me, something that, ironically, I've grown used to carrying. So I keep my distance. I let the dreams come and go. I seldom speak of it, except to those who truly want to hear. In the end, it's just a house, and yet it's so much more. It's a stage upon which my childhood fears danced, a reflection of my own anxieties, a labyrinth that shaped my psyche. Whether haunted or not, it achieved the same effect. It haunted me. And so, I continue walking by occasionally, from the safety of the sidewalk across the street, pretending I'm just another passerby. I glance up at the windows, half expecting to see that silhouette again, the one with messy hair, standing at an angle, gazing out into the night. But the curtains remain still. There are no flickers of movement. No watchers at the attic window. Just the pastel blue paint, the basketball hoop, children's laughter somewhere behind the walls. To any ordinary observer, it's a happy home. But I know what I felt there, and I know what I still feel. Some nights, I see that tall figure. Some nights, I find the secret passage, the basement, the wheelchair, and the stench of rot. Some nights, I hear footsteps echoing on old wooden stairs, a presence creeping closer. And in those moments, I'm 8 years old again, lost in a house far too large and too dark. Even if I wrestle the nightmares into submission, they remain part of me, a reminder that the line between the normal and the inexplicable is sometimes thinner than we care to admit. Thus, the story ends here, or rather, it continues on in the realm of my dreams. The house endures, both in reality and in my psyche. Perhaps one day, I'll gather the nerve to step onto that porch again. Until then, I'll carry my half-waking memories and let my nightmares tell the rest of the tale. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and click the bell.